Rocket launcher, hello! Wants to get taped? Or webbed, should I say? Woo! Oh, you're getting taped to the ground. Webbed to the ground, mate. Whip! What up? What up? Catch! Into the wall you go there, Sonny. Oh! Ow. Oh, you bitch. Okay then. Alright then. You wanna go? You wanna go? You wanna let it go, son? Is my webbing. How do you like it? Good night. There you go. No, I'll just web you up. It's fine. Hello, who's ever watching?
Well, you've got a red suit.
Whoever's watching, hello. You have got my respect. What? Oh, it's gonna get the style. And away we go! Whee! And it's up here. Awesome. Right, where is it? There it is. Wait, there we go. I'm gonna get that in a minute. Got it. Alright. Skip. And no one's selling drugs in my bloody city. And away we go! Hello! 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 How you doing? Woo! Oh, there's two of them. Have fun. Ooh. That must look like it hurt, yeah. Ow. Okay, just for that. Get off. Oh. Woo! Woo! Alright, you're getting on my nerves. You realise that? Ah, you. Okay. Ow! Ow! Ah, feisty! Here, take this. I'm sure you love it. Oh, don't need to. Ow! Ow! Can you stop punching me? I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die. Oh, fuck. Ow! Fuck. I got a bit cocky. I'm gonna tell you that now. I got a bit cocky. You get cocky, you get your ass kicked. As I'm saying. Okay. Alright, let's go and collect these bags. Where are I? Hey, there's one. Way up. There's a bag. Awesome. Just looking for that. Only 5 bags left. Well, that'll be full. Where is it? There it is. Hello! Why is my phone buzzing? Hey! Wow, where is it? There it is. No. Let's put it here. Let's have a look around the map. Looks like 3 towers left. Awesome. Oh wow, a load of people watching. Awesome. And YouTube. Ooh, very twisty fresh. And there's a tower over there. Wait, which one's closer? This one. Okay. Oh, what's this? Oh, no way! We go! Hello! How are yous? Hi, spastics! Okay. You did it! Oh, there's a big guy there. Hello. I came to say hello. I said I'd say hello! Oh, you bitch. No grenades, thanks. I don't like them. I don't like your grenades. Whoa! Oh, hello. And then down you go. 360, eh? Freestyle! Oh, you better. Ow. Ow. Did you just tell me to die, you little spastic? Ow. I forgot he's immune to that. Ah, he's not immune to my dodging, because I'm a bloody genius. Hello. Ow. Something tells me that I need to... Oh, damn it. Web shooter, why? Why do you do this, web shooter? And now we do something called funning. Okay. No, down. Good boy.
I'll get you.
Door's stuck. Spider-Man saves the day. Hey! And come on, peeps, let's go! And you're now safe. Man, how I love this game. Now where's that tower? Right up there. Awesome. Hello. Ah, I want that. Ah, no. Wrong thing. Ah, there we go. Now I can just perch myself here. Awesome. It's not actually that hard to do them, to be honest. Okay, skippity roo, and there's back down there. Hello. And away we go. And yes, I'm doing this late because my parents are out, so... Where is it? Oh, that was underneath, never mind. That kind of favored my plan. A little complicated. Oh. Ah, there it is. Thank you. And we're going to go and get another tower. I have not completed the game yet. Just thought I might as well let you know. And... oh yeah, I keep forgetting. When you go on the ceiling, if you can do this. I'm joking. Okay, let's go and get that. Let's be a little bit serious and get the tower. And then we'll probably go and do this mission if I have time. First of all, I want these bags. Okay. Is this a thing that you need to kind of do? Long waves. Okay. There we go. Gotcha. Is that it? Yep, there's the bag. So, question is, where is the bloody bag? And it's all the way. I'm sure if everyone knows that symbol, you know what that is. Hold on. There we go. Avengers Tower.
I think they're probably somewhere
Forgot
on the
they
West
said
Coast right
that
now.
in the game.
Probably surfing or something.
Oh my god. New York reminds me of Prototype. I miss the old days of
Where
Prototype.
else? Mayor Osborne, thanks for calling.
Oh, hello, JJJ.
No, thank you, Jonah. When you were publishing the Bugle, you were always fair to me. Tough, sure, but fair.
Well, that's my job, Mr. Mayor. All I have is my integrity, and I won't compromise it for anyone. Now, what's this crucial breaking news you're revealing for the first time anywhere on my show?
Oh, go away,
Well,
Jody
after the
Jameson.
brutal, cowardly city hall bombing that
You're annoying
almost
me.
claimed my life, it's clear
Whatever.
our understaffed
We're doing a bit of skydiving!
help. And I want to reassure the people of New York.
Skydiving! Hey!
Aha!
And now I'll go and get that
You all
one.
heard me say we
Awesome.
needed this. Are you using my idea of bringing in cops from Lake Placid?
Ow, shut up.
No, that was a fine idea. No, this would be a security contractor, much like the ones our military uses to assist
Awesome.
our troops overseas.
Okay.
I can't name it until the contractor's signed, but their qualifications are impeccable.
Whoever's watching
that
this,
sounds terrific, Mr. Mayor.
hello.
Though, of course, I'll have to reserve my tough but fair...
And of course, you all know me as either Ghost Sniper or by my real name because you probably
Final
know me
judgment
from
until
school
I have all the
or in
facts.
some way.
I'd expect nothing less. And let me stress, this is in no way replacing our brave officers.
Let's go and grab this.
In a way that
And then,
the red tape
do you know what we do?
result.
We go over to the scaffolding,
Pleasure here.
or the
So I can share my
constructive
theory on how
tower. Hello.
Spider-Man may well be
Thank you.
working with the
Oh,
demon.
camera. Awesome.
And a fascinating
I've missed
theory
some
it is,
bags.
I'm sure, but my doctors are advising me to
How
get some
dare
rest
he?
now, so if you don't mind.
How dare me
Oh,
miss a
of
bag?
course. Thank you for calling in.
Yes,
Mr.
the-
Mayor.
that's the
I'll
last
answer
one.
for
You kidding me?
anytime.
First of all,
There!
we'll go and get
Did you
this.
hear? Tough but fair. That's our new slogan. I don't care who else is using it. Don't care.
Oh, shut up, Jameson. Has a mustache, by the way. Spastic.
And that's that.
Joking.
Every crime tower in the city's now repaired.
Pretty good work, right?
Yep.
Pretty good.
Ooh.
Yuri,
Ooh.
I found a fist constrict.
Servants I can send cars.
Noisy?
Where is he?
I can do
There
noise.
he is. Oh. Take a nice seat. I'll take a nice hang around. Hang around with me, Sonny. Is there anything that I can distract? Oh shit. Whatever. Well, that felt miserably. There we go. Nee, a nee. Here's a barrel. Bye. Have a good time. Hey, no grenades. Have a box. Have a box. What the fuck? What is wrong with me? Deanie. Up. Come here. Come here. Kick to the face. And there we go. Get off my building.
Get him. The boss wants Spider-Man.
It's not even my... It's not... Just gonna tape you up. Whoever threw that at me, well done. Oh! A lot of people are gonna get bored of watching me do this, but whatever. Okay. Kick to the face. Woo! Oh, I should have took you out. Ooh, eyes on. Cheers for the grenade! Morons! Get out of here! Ow! Ooh. Up! Can you go away? Can you go away from me? Can you go away from me? Thanks. And Joey was online. Hello. Go away.
Hey, new arrival. Did I mention
Whoa! Get off my building. Bye! Have a good time!
Just checked. There's been a rash
There you
of
go.
counterfeit bills in that neighborhood.
Where's the grenade?
counterfeit?
No, come here.
That's a dying art. I'll do my part
Come
to
here, I
make
don't
it
care.
extinct.
You just take a chill pill. What'd I say? What'd I say? What'd I say? I said take a fucking chill pill. Alright, you're annoying me, first of all. And I didn't want to do that to that guy, but whatever.
Alone? Yep, want
Here.
this goon.
I think you missed this. Guy. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, there's two guys taped up there. Taped up? Webbed up. Dee dee dee. Dee dee. You're annoying me. Go away. Dee dee dee. Dee dee dee. Wee. No. Bye! Have a good time! Oh, wait. I keep forgetting. I can't do that to you.
Guys, Willie said
I can do that to you, though.
Scout's honor.
Get out of here. Ah! Whoop. 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 Ow. Sit down. Oh, wait. I should have used it on you. Hold on. Oh, what's it? Ah! Ah, you're annoying, man. You know you're so annoying. Whoever threw that grenade, you're gonna pay. Ow. Why you sat me? Why you sat me? Why you sat me? Spastic. bastard. Get out of here. I give this for you. Sit down. And the legs. And there we go. Why is my workshop? Hey! Wait! Alright then, that was just a fail. Now get out of here. Whoa! And that, people, is how you clear out a fist hideout. I need cider. I'm joking.
Great. That's one more reason Wilson Fisk
Jeez,
can't
man.
use to pay his lawyers.
How many more Fisk construction sites are there?
He had every one of them working overtime to bring in money.
For New York.
I trust you've enjoyed yourself.
Willie, funny story. I was just at one of your buildings. And you'll be shocked to hear that there were shenanigans of the criminal variety. TLDR, Fisk construction is closed.
I have other sources of revenue, but you've inconvenienced me, and there will be consequences. My memory's long. My reach is longer.
I should make all the guys who've sworn to kill me fight it out for the privilege.
Might as well, eh? Right. Ah, Mary Jane, Mary. Wait, what was I gonna do? Gonna go and get a bag. There we go. That's why.